Welcome to Mormon Book Reviews, where an evangelical encounters the restoration. I'm your host, Steven Pynakker, and I just wanted to say a few words about the people that are suffering with these horrible fires in Los Angeles. Neighborhood after neighborhood being devastated. This is a very trying time. I really appreciated the thoughts and prayers directed towards Mom and I during the hurricane season, and we want to express that to the people that are suffering right now, have lost everything with their homes being burned down, and let's keep them in our prayers. Also, originally Greg Mattson was supposed to join us today, but unfortunately, he lost his voice. And of course, Greg Mattson, with those golden chops not working, oh, the money makers, oh my gosh. I even tell him, so this is a guy that would have been doing classic rock or had actually been doing a DJ in the 60s and 70s during the height of rock and roll era. He would have been the perfect voice for that. So we wish Greg to get well soon. In the meantime, I want to thank Jacob Hansen for being able to, fresh from teaching seminary, here and got up this morning and taught seminary and now is here with me at Mormon Book Reviews. Jacob, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate it very much. Always fun to be on with you.
Yes, I always enjoy our conversations. And of course, I will get the inevitable criticisms directed towards me for having you on from all usually the same people. But I find that I don't know if they ever actually watch the episodes. I think they just are mocking the thumbnail. So I don't have much to say to them other than, hey, listen to our conversations and hopefully you can get something out of it. And then I'm more than willing to listen to criticisms if you've actually watched the episode. So the reason I had Jacob on is the other day I was talking to him and said, "Hey, do you want to talk about the article that just came out this weekend in the Salt Lake Tribune, written by Peggy Fletcher Stack, about the if you want to call it a purge of progressives and LGBTQ people or affirming people in the staff of BYU." Of course, a little over a month ago, I did a live stream where I talked about the very same thing with a lot of my sources that were also talking to Peggy. And I felt like it was important to get the story out there because I've been working on it since last August. And I have many, many connections at BYU, and I have many, many friends who are afraid they might lose their job or are planning early retirement or are actively seeking jobs elsewhere. This has implications, and whether there are many people who are in favor of these things happening, there are many people that are upset about this. And I want to have this platform set aside so that people from different positions and views on this can discuss their perspective on it. And that's why I asked Jacob and Greg to come on. Unfortunately, Greg couldn't make it, but Jacob, I just wanted to ask you, just reading the article. I know you posted a video out there, kind of critical of Peggy and stuff like that. But what was your overall thoughts when you first read the article?
So I was more like, wait a minute. I guess in my mind I was like, okay, so you have a church-run school that has people within its teaching staff who are in some way opposed to the doctrines and teachings of that church, and the church is therefore potentially going to be removing those people from positions of authority and leadership within that institution. And I was like, how is this a news story? It's sort of like, would there be a big news story if, let's say, the Roman Catholic Church removed people who denied the Eucharist as being, the essence of Christ's body and blood in at Notre Dame? You know what I mean? If there were people who were preaching against the Pope and the papacy at Notre Dame, I went to a Catholic school growing up. I went to a bunch of my plans sending my kids to them as well. And like, yeah, I would expect that if there was a teacher in there going against Catholic teachings and doctrine, that they wouldn't be a teacher there very long.
Well, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up because I was actually going to parallel and compare and contrast what's happened in the evangelical world and with religious institutions in general. Because, in one hand, BYU strives to be a world-class institution and is striving to be kind of like Notre Dame or maybe like a Baylor. Um, but many people are saying it's actually heading more towards Liberty University or Bob Jones University and how they want to do it. And the reason I say that is, first of all, there are plenty of people who are critics of the church. They don't do purges at Notre Dame, and there are. I'm sure there's atheist professors at Notre Dame. I know there's a very prominent Protestant Calvinist, Alvin Plantinga, who, of course,
Yeah,
their very
fan
basis
of.
of Protestantism is to protest the Catholic Church.
Yeah, but he can't. But does Alvin Planting attack the Catholic Church and its doctrines at Notre Dame?
I'm sure he has debates and conversations, maybe theological conversations, where this is what the reform position is, but I
Sure,
don't think he
and I
bashes.
think that, but in the context of BYU, you're talking about there's been protests and there's a obvious movement in the church that's causing immense confusion amongst the members about what the sort of official position of the church is, and is this stuff acceptable theologically and all that kind of stuff. And our church from the top, the leadership is very, very clear about what our doctrine is and around these sorts of subjects. Um, and so the fact that there are people in there subverting that, um, it doesn't surprise me at all. Here's an analogy I would use. Let's say that um, there was a white supremacist at BYU, and they were teaching all of the disavowed doctrines of the church around race and saying that the church was wrong about that, and that we actually, white people are in some way superior and that everyone should be white. And, if you join the gospel, you'll become white and delightsome. And we're teaching all of that. And they got fired. And there was a purge of a group of professors that were teaching that stuff. Would anybody be complaining? Would Peggy Fletcher Stack be talking about, oh my goodness, there's a purge at BYU. They're getting rid of these white supremacists who are teaching against the church? Of course not. So now all I'm saying here is, if you're going against the doctrines of the current church, you should not expect that you're going to last long at a church university. In fact, I would say, why are you? But I know why they're at the university. They're there because they want to change it. Like, activism is not about leaving an institution you don't like, it's about changing an institution. And so there's a fundamental conflict that arises between the activist class and the brethren. The brethren represent those who actually hold the authority, and then the activist class are those who wish to try and alter things. And so I wouldn't expect for an activist against the church and the brethren to last long at a church school in any institution, whether they're advocating for, gay marriage or transgender ideology within or white supremacy. Those both go against the teachings of the church, and the church will take action against it.
Well, I guess the question is that, one of the ideas is, see, one thing I don't like is I don't like the fact that there aren't a whole lot of conservatives that have a snowball's chance in heck of getting tenure at like Ivy League institutions. I don't like the fact that there is a bias against conservatives or libertarians in many other institutions. And I like the idea of having the free exchange of ideas in these institutions of higher learning. So for me, the idea of having people that might be provocative or have a narrative that's maybe a little bit different than what the church is teaching can be challenging to the students, but challenging in a good way. I mean, in that, let's what do you really believe and why do you believe it? And so I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing to expose people to different ideas, whether these ideas are conservative ideas that maybe somebody from these liberals have never been exposed to conservative ideas. In the same way, maybe exposing people who have been raised in the Mormon corridor who maybe don't have a lot of exposure to the outside world, maybe other than maybe serving a mission, that maybe exposing them to different ideas to challenge them isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. So I would say, though, that a church university isn't like other universities. At another university that doesn't claim to have any sort of an ideological bias, I would be fine with that. Now at BYU, everything at BYU should be taught from a gospel perspective, from a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. How do we approach all of the ideas in the world, right? It's a church university. Now, another university like Harvard or Yale or others, they don't approach it with a pre-existing sort of frame that they're looking at it through. See, that's the difference. This is a church university. Now, I think that we should teach, for example, they should teach about Marxism at BYU. Like, they should teach it. You should make people, I mean, in my channel, I talk all about ideas that run completely contrary to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I try my best to steelman that position, give the best version of the other side of this argument. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints rejects communism and Marxism, but it should teach them in detail about that sort of a theory so that they understand it, and then they should understand what the church's perspective is on it. The church of the BYU should not be neutral. It shouldn't come across as we're just kind of a neutral arbiter of information. It is we will examine all aspects of truth and reality, but we're going to do it through the lens and from the paradigm of a faithful Latter-day Saint institution. It's how do we as Latter-day Saints approach the biggest, most complex topics of, social issues and history and science and business, and how do we as Latter-day Saints approach that? So I just don't think you're comparing apples to apples. And the funny thing is, you pointed out, none of the other institutions are neutral either. They act like they don't have an ideological sort of code that you have to adhere to, but it's obvious that they do. And in fact, and their code is wildly different than ours. And so that's the beautiful thing about BYU. That's what makes it unique, is that we actually approach these high level topics, high level academic endeavors from the perspective of a Latter-day Saint. But if we lose that perspective as Latter-day Saints informing everything that we do, then, I mean, what are we? We're just like any other university. We're just sliding more into that sort of view. And sorry, I'm kind of rambling here. I'll get not too much on this, but I think framing this as conservative versus progressive, that's not it. A Latter-day Saint doesn't use that frame.
Okay.
Our frame is it true or is it false in light of the gospel of Jesus Christ?
Well, okay. So I just want to say that, that throughout the years there have been instances where the church has clamped down on perceived progressives, and often it is typically progressives that get purged, historically.
Mm-hmm.
It's also, there's been more institutional control. Like, for instance, when we saw with the church historians department, when they called it the age of Camelot, if you will, when Leonard Arrington was in charge of it. And then ever since they kind of clamped down on that, and ever since then, it's only been lawyers who've been head of the church history department as opposed to historians. And I just sometimes wonder, is this good to have that much institutional control over the academic world? I mean, what about the idea of the concept of academic freedom?
So, and that's actually that's a very good thing to bring up in the sense of that's the real conversation that is actually challenging and tricky, right? There is you don't want to over restrict it to where anyone who has any idea that is even slightly off from what the church thinks in any way, that they get purged out, because everyone has ideas that are contrary to the church. On the other hand, if you have activists actively subverting the church, then that's a problem as well. So there's always a question between how much institutional control should we have? Like, what is this Latter-day Saint perspective that we need everyone to have? And I'm not going to say that every decision that's ever been made in relation to BYU and its professors has been right in either direction. I think that they may have gotten rid of people that probably were like, it would have been better that they had stayed. But I don't think that's our situation currently. I think our situation currently, again, anyone who's not blind can see that there is a wild sort of activist class that is emerging within the church generally and within BYU specifically. And they're pushing ideas and ideologies that simply run contrary to the church and its teachings. So while there is academic freedom, and I believe in expanding that freedom as much as we can without crossing the lines of where, because again, if you're going to say that BYU brings this Latter-day Saint lens to the table, if you go so far that there is no Latter-day Saint lens there at all, right? And so there needs to still, there needs to be freedom, but there also needs to be a frame around that freedom where there are
Okay.
boundary lines.
Well, I just want to say that I've talked to many sources that have either are at BYU or were at BYU, and I don't think I would consider any of those people to be activists. These are people who are just doing their job, teaching their classes, and they're afraid of what they're going to saying the wrong thing in their classes because they might get reported. There was one who told me, I used to tell people, my students, look, I am a liberal. This is the framework that I operate under, but I'm not here to challenge, to undermine your beliefs or anything like that. I just want to lay it out there that I'm a liberal. He's even afraid to even say that he's a liberal now for
Yeah,
fear
and
of.
I think that that's the thing is what they're afraid of and what they should be afraid of. Like I don't see anything I haven't been shown anything that Clark Gilbert is doing specifically that is out of bounds given the current
Well, do you
context.
think though that in an environment in which professors are afraid to even be able to talk about, like, just to say that they're a liberal or that they're a progressive, that they feel that afraid to say that? Don't you think that really could be stifling on the ability of these people to be authentic and also be able to teach their classes?
I think that they should teach their classes in a way that aligns with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. What you are being liberal or conservative, the thing is that to a certain extent is the problem, is that we frame everything like that. The church isn't going to kick you out because you're a progressive per se. They're going to kick you out when you do things that run to undermine the doctrines and teachings of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so you can't and all of this really comes down to, and I believe me, they have all sorts of things at BYU. They have a lot of academic freedom there. What they don't have right now specifically is the ability to publicly challenge the church's position on marriage, sexuality, and gender.
Okay. So
That's where this is all coming from.
I I just want to say that, I like I said, I've talked to these people and I hear what they're saying, and I will give you an instance of, without giving too many details, an individual that I've known for a few years now, who's a graduate of BYU, okay, is well regarded in the academic community, is part of the LGBTQ community, okay, who was going to give a presentation this fall at a school-sponsored forum and was disinvited. Their topic had nothing to do with this, LGBTQ issues. They were disinvited because they were LGBTQ. Don't you? I mean, and I can tell you this is what happened because these are what my sources are telling me. And another person who was supposed to speak at this thing, dealing with a thing about history that has absolutely nothing to do with anything progressive, was also disinvited to this conference. So here you have people, just the fact that they are progressive or viewed as progressive or a member of the LGBT community, even if it has nothing to do with their presentation, has anything to do with those issues, they get disinvited. Is that something that we want to see in an academic institution?
I don't know. I don't know the specifics of the other side of that story. So
Mhm.
unless I know, maybe they were disinvited for other reasons. There's an assumption here that that must be why they were disinvited. And if they were disinvited for that, yeah, I would be against that. I
Okay.
don't think that you disinvite someone simply on that basis. Now, with that in mind, one of the challenges that we have right now is that you have to trust people not to engage in activism. And there are people that you know uh, I don't know if I trust them. There are many people at BYU right now that I know of who are professors that I don't trust at all because of the things that they have said and do say. And so ultimately, there are church authorities who rightfully, and I'm all for it, should be checking on BYU and its professors to ensure that they maintain the framing of everything within the bounds of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Okay. Now, I've talked to another, and again, these are anonymous sources, so I want to be fair to you, but I'm just basing, these are people that I've talked to, and these are some people that also were talked to Peggy. I've talked to one person in their department. He said this individual said that 50% of the faculty are looking for employment elsewhere or early retirement. I mean,
Excellent.
let's see. I don't, Jacob, I don't think that's these are just regular professors. These are not activists. I'm trying to point out that if you can show me a department where 50% of the faculty are activists who want to destroy the church, I don't think you'll find that.
I'm not saying
I
activists who
think
want to
most of these
destroy the
people,
church.
I'm saying
That
these,
I would not say that.
what's that?
I would not say that they're activists who want to destroy the church. In
Well,
fact, I don't think
oh,
any
they're activists
activist
that want
wants
to
to
change the church.
they want to
Activists want
change
to
the
change the
church.
institution. Okay, so that's how you would frame it. Okay, then to be
Absolutely.
fair, okay, that's fair. But but I'm just saying is that yes, you can give examples of activists on campus that are employed by the church. Got it. But when it gets down to the ability of teachers just to be able to teach in their classrooms for fear of retribution, and maybe the stuff they're going to say is not even controversial nor critical of the church, but they're still afraid to say anything that could be perceived as critical, doesn't that kind of feel a little Orwellian to you?
Well, it kind of depends on the department because if it's the sociology department at BYU, I think it should be abolished entirely, burned to the ground, and started from the ground up with new people.
Okay.
That's basically my view on that, and several other departments as well. So the fact that some of these departments don't feel comfortable, there's a reason they don't feel comfortable, and they're never going to feel comfortable, and they should not feel comfortable because if your views run, and here's my thing, if you have views, everyone has views that run contrary to the church, some view, right? Like
Mhm.
that's just the way that it is.
Yeah.
And you know what we all do? We all don't in public challenge we focus on the things within the church where we have the agreement with the church, and that's where we focus what we're talking about or teaching or whatever. We all do that. Okay. However, and I'm fine with that, by the way. Like, good. You don't have like we don't have some radical orthodox sort of thing where you have to agree with everything perfectly in the church. However, what you teach publicly and what you engage in publicly, that is open to public scrutiny. And so what I would say is that either these people should leave because you're never going to feel comfortable because you're never going to feel like you can basically have whatever view you want at BYU. And so it's not the school for you. So, move on. Or the other one is they're being hysterical and they're creating a culture that doesn't actually exist. Because if you're not going to in any way sort of oppose church doctrine or teachings in a public setting, well, then you shouldn't be afraid. And until you can bring me a case of someone being fired who didn't do anything wrong, then I'm going to say this sounds more like hysteria than an actual thing that people need to worry about. And if they were to just get rid of people simply because they have, like they voted for Joe Biden or something, like, okay, like then I'd be against it. I would have
Okay.
a real problem with that.
So well, I want to look at it this way too. Okay, so doesn't this kind of institutional control kind of go against the early days of the Restoration, in which it seemed like it was a free for all, that all different ideas were expressed. People would get into arguments. You'd literally have general members of the Quorum of the 12 have debates like over Adam God and and all this kind of stuff. And there seemed to be this idea, like this really amazing thing with the Restoration was is this ability of this genius of Joseph Smith to be able to take ideas from all these different places, listen to other ideas, different religions, uh, have people there that could contradict him. And also, people could even challenge Joseph Smith and did during those times. So, don't you feel like, wouldn't you rather have more of that, of the early days of the Restoration, where you could speak out actually and say, hey,
Well,
I,
Joseph Smith
I
learned real early on that that's a delicate balance. And as you remember, Hiram Page, in late 1830, I believe, within months of the church starting, I actually just have been studying this in some detail, um, runs into the situation of, oh crap, if I give ultimate freedom, people are going to start, there's it's going to be chaos, right?
uh-huh.
And the Lord rightfully revealed that no, there is an order to this house. Now, the house is a house of order, but as my good I want to call him friend because I never met the guy, but the guy that I really enjoy, Jordan Peterson, he talks about there's this balance between order and chaos. You are absolutely correct. Too much order, too much rigidity is stifling and it's
Mhm.
essentially tyranny.
Yep.
And I agree that that can happen even within the church. You can have an overly pharisaical, legalistic thing.
Hmm.
But there's also chaos where there's not enough control. And and within the BYU's unique thing is that we aren't just anything goes. That's why Latter-day Saints send their kids there, right? If you want to go somewhere where anything goes, like, no, if you go to BYU, we have order here. We have an order that we've created around the restored gospel. And you can be assured that the professors here conform to that order, that the students do, and that creates the environment that creates the unique thing that is BYU. With that in mind, it's like with the honor code. Are there things in the honor code that I think are too stringent and rigid? Of course. Are there things that I think maybe they should enforce more? Sure. It's always a tension and a battle. Right now, in this specific day and age, BYU is not dealing with too much control over its professors around LGBT issues. Its problem is that they've allowed for a long leash, and activists have taken advantage of that and have, and I just go watch Greg's show for a while and watch some of my episodes on BYU. And there are things where you have professors insinuating that Jesus was gay and that Joseph of Egypt was gay. Thomas Wayment talks about that, insinuating that and things. You have professors praying to Heavenly Mother publicly. You have talking about how radical feminism is like what our little girls need to be taught from a young age. I mean, this isn't just like a little bit of progressivism. These are ideologies that are just totally incompatible with the gospel. And what they do is they foment an activist culture. And that activist culture moves into the church and creates all the issues and confusion that I've talked about at length within the church. So if we want to not have confusion in the church, we need to have more order. And right now we're dealing with serious confusion in the church, as I've talked about at length in other videos.
Okay, so I think let me just push back a little bit because I think you're conflating activists with progressives in one sense, because I will tell you, it's not just saying, "Oh, I voted for Joe Biden." Then that's not necessarily the case. But I will tell you that there. Well, let me just explain to you just a little history here. So in the 70s and 80s, you basically had a pushback against the liberalization and progressive movements within mainline denominations, and you saw this in particular with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and the Southern Baptist Convention. And one of the things that they did in the 70s and 80s, they purged all their institutions of anybody that was progressive, whether they are theologically progressive or whether they were ideologically progressive. And essentially, they clamped down. And essentially, rather than academic qualifications being the most important thing, the main test was orthodoxy. Are you orthodox? Are you conservative? Are you in line with the teachings of these churches? And that became and then that swept throughout the evangelical world going into 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now, one of my evangelical friends told me, says, that will work for a decade or so, for 10, 20 years. But then he said, but then you'll have the Me Too moments. You'll have these people who are not qualified. Their main qualification is that they were conservative or orthodox. They weren't necessarily academically up to snuff, and also maybe their personal things weren't also like with Me Too and stuff like that. So it's a trade-off. You could take people that have PhDs from these great institutions and be able to expose the students to these ideas. You get rid of those people and you replace them with people that are more ideologically inclined. And that's what happened in the evangelical world. And many people feel that that was not a good thing. Now, there are others that still think it's a great thing. So I'm not trying to say, that this was good or bad or one way, but it just seems like the church is using the playbook that the evangelicals and the Southern Baptists used back in the day. But there's also implications that these institutions aren't viewed as well as they were. There's a lot of people that are afraid that now the gradings of the national rankings for BYU are going down as a result of this kind of stuff. What do you have to say about that? I mean, the idea that you're going to lose highly qualified people because they have a particular worldview that's not in line with people who are more conservative and traditional, and they lose all. Basically, you have this brain drain happening. And that's what happened in the evangelical world.
So I would like to get, sorry about that. I'd like to get more specific,
Okay.
because the church right now is not, I don't see any evidence that the church is purging anyone who is not, a Trump waving MAGA, a Trump flag waving MAGA guy. You know what I mean? Like the church has plenty of leeway for political diversity within the church. What the church doesn't have leeway for and should not have leeway for is for people who advocate for uh, same-sex marriage, for the notion that gender can be changed through social transition or through surgery or something like that. Those people should not be, if a person holds those views, that's fine. Keep them to yourself. Do not incorporate it in any way into your teaching within the church. And frankly, if I have two professors that I'm interviewing, both are equally qualified, and I don't make the trade-off. I don't say, okay, you have to be progressive and if you're going to be a great professor. I think we can find people who are highly qualified in their field and who align with the teachings of the church, or at the very least are willing to say, look, I have some things I think gay marriage is great. I'm not going to bring that into this. Like I'm going to keep that out. And there's going to be a culture at the school that says, yeah, you're going to keep that to yourself because that's not relevant. That's not why we're hiring you. We have not hired you to talk about, homosexual marriage. We're talking to you, or we've hired you to teach engineering. So like stick to the engineering. And I think that's fair and right. Like you should tell people, we hired you for your expertise in this field, and that's why you should be doing that. Now, if their expertise causes them to say, well, the church is wrong about gay marriage because I'm a sociology professor and I think that it's a power play by white heterosexual patriarchal men or something, like, yeah, get rid of that person. Like they don't belong in this school. They don't hold to the sociological view of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And if you can't reconcile sociology with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, well, then we just won't have a sociology department at the university.
So if you're in the engineer department and you are personally in favor of gay marriage and you tell your bishop that, and then your bishop says, well, I can no longer give you a temple recommend, therefore you're going to lose your job at the school. Do you think that's healthy?
No, so for that alone, absolutely not. I think that I think a bishop is doing something wrong if a bishop denies a person a temple recommend, simply on that basis. I would say though that so let's, there's the question. Do you believe in any teachings or doctrines that are contrary to the church, essentially, as part of the temple recommend interview?
Mhm.
And I frankly think that there's a lot of members that are dishonest in that question. They don't ever tell their bishop about the things that they believe that are
Right.
contrary to the church, that are meaningful, not like, some really small thing, but these are big issues that they have a significant disagreement with the church. You should be talking to your bishop about that. And I believe that bishops should evaluate that with a person. If I were a bishop and I was in that position, and I don't know for sure, but I would guess this is probably off the top of my head how I think I would respond, would be, I'd say, look, everyone has things that they don't, have issues with the church. However, um, I if you're not publicly advocating for it, I think you're probably just fine. With that in mind, I would have to have a serious conversation about what they think about the law of chastity. Because in the temple, you covenant to keep the law of chastity. And so if you think that the law of chastity doesn't forbid homosexual behavior, then you may not be qualified to go to the temple. Because how is it that you can agree to a covenant of chastity when you don't agree with the church's definition of what chastity is? Right? So, um, while it would be a conversation I'd have to have with that person to see if they were willing to say, well, I think maybe it could be reconciled with it. And maybe, again, I would have to let the spirit guide, but I could see an instance in which a person was given a temple recommend despite feeling that gay marriage was morally legitimate. On the other hand, though, I can see if a person truly is like, no, the church is wrong about this, gay sex is wonderful, and I have no problem with other people doing it, I would say you're not qualified to enter the temple to make a covenant because that covenant is not like your definition of chastity doesn't align with the church's. And so you can't be making a covenant to chastity in good faith unless you actually are covenanting to what the church actually means by chastity. Right. So it's a little bit of a complicated topic, but I wouldn't say that uh, um, it's an absolute disqualifier.
Okay.
But I also would say that it's not it could potentially be disqualifying.
So I spoke with somebody who ended up losing their job because of their doubts on the issue of sexuality. This person had a family member that came out and stuff like that and expressed that to their bishop, and then
Mhm.
basically a week later was informed that they no longer will be able to that they don't have a temple recommend, and so this person sought employment elsewhere. Um, but this person actually said, I actually am glad I had that conversation with him and that this was a bishop that had integrity, that was willing to ask the questions. He says, the difficult thing is that there's a lot of bishops that don't ask those questions of BYU professors and employees, and that they don't want to be involved in that. So he said, I give credit, even though he lost his job over this. He says, I give him credit for actually asking the questions that the bishops are supposed to ask, and wishes that there was more of that. This person also said, listen, I got um, no support from my dean. It's like there was nobody to have my back. So basically, he was just left uh, on his own because the bishop decided that this to happen. And so he says, unfortunately, what the school wants you to do is actually lie, to actually to lie in these bishops' interviews. That's the implication, is if you want to keep your job, and you just need to lie to your bishop, and that puts people of integrity in very difficult positions to do that. So I mean, don't you kind of see how hard this would be to be an individual who basically 90% from what I've been told in most departments, 90% of the staff would not be able to find jobs at other institutions, which means they're kind of trapped at BYU. So let's say you enter in BYU, you sign up, you're gung ho, and then throughout the years, maybe your views change on certain things, and you tell your bishop, and then you lose your job, and that's the end of your academic career. I mean, do you understand how difficult it would be for these people? Because if they tell the
Well,
truth, they'll lose their job and their livelihood.
yeah, I would, there's a lot of integrity. It's like what matters more, your integrity or your paycheck. I know
Mhm.
when the rubber meets the road, that's like a hard thing, but I think we all know what the right answer is. But the right answer isn't always the easy answer. And so a lot of people take the easier path rather than taking the right path. That's just the way it goes. If you're a Christian, if you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you're willing to die for the truth and for your integrity. Like now that's I mean, it's a really high standard. And I know it's like there are real lives that get affected by this. 100% agree. Okay? But like if it comes down to your integrity or you have to go and be a janitor or work at McDonald's, like what do you think Jesus would tell you to do? Right? Like how much is the truth worth to you? And I think that they should be honest from the start. And frankly, if you are a professor at BYU, you should be honest with your bishop when he asks you about those questions about things. And if you lose your job over it, yeah, like that's rough, but that is the prerogative. That's the way the university has been set up. It's been set up that you need to hold a honest temple recommend. Now you can lie so that you can get that recommend so that you can continue with your job and go to the temple and all of that. But at some point I have to question the integrity of people like that. Just be honest. If you were honest from the start, then you probably wouldn't have been hired at BYU in the first place. Because when you got interviewed for BYU, they asked you those questions, right? Now, I think honestly, one of the biggest problems in the church today is local bishops and stake presidents who, um, who, as you said, don't want to touch this. They're nice guys. There's one thing about a bishop and stake presidents, they're nice guys. Now, I'm not saying go and excommunicate everyone, but like not at all. But if I have, like I said, if I had a member It's just an ordinary member. And it's the other thing, it's a privilege to teach at BYU. You're in a position of high influence in the church if you are a BYU professor. There's a lot to that. So we always hold people to higher standards when they're in higher levels of position. But if your average member comes up to me, if I'm a bishop or whatever, and tells me about that they disagree with the church about LGBT stuff, right? I'm just going to tell them, like, look, I'm going to try and help them to understand the doctrine of the church. But if they continue to disagree, I'm going to say, look, that's fine, but you can't be out publicly opposing the church. We all have views that we disagree with, but we all have to be on the team here. And the team is run by the team captains, and that is the brethren. And if you want to be a team player, then you're going to have to say, yeah, I'm not going to go out and promote these views that I have that are different from the church. I just don't agree with this particular point of doctrine. But we have a problem in the church because people now feel that it's okay to publicly sort of band together with other people and pressure others into feeling that certain ideas that are taught by the church are false. But it's not my church. It's not your church. It's the Church of Jesus Christ, and it's run through the priesthood keys of his quorum of the 12 apostles. We follow their lead. And if you don't do that, like, I'm sorry, you're never going to feel comfortable in the church going against the brethren. You just never are.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious because, one of the things, excuse me, that I like about the Restoration is this idea of challenging maybe orthodoxy, challenging the dominant narrative of the Catholics and Protestants and what have you, and also the councils and everything like that. Now, you had alluded to a professor saying, like, well, Joseph of Egypt was gay, and you have a problem with that. What would you say to a professor who said that Jesus Christ was a polygamist? Would that disqualify them?
Um, if Jesus Christ, well, actually, no, because I don't like the church doesn't disavow polygamy as a principle.
Hmm.
The church believes in polygamy as a principle that is it's kind of like war. I like
Yeah.
to use war as the example. The norm is for us not to have war. Okay. The norm is monogamy. However, there are certain circumstances under which it would be justified. So if someone was teaching that, now I think a better example would be if a professor was teaching, for example, the notion that blacks were less valiant in the pre-existence. Okay. If a professor was teaching that, I think you, me, and John DeLynn, we would all be in favor of that professor being let go. See, I have a consistent standard, but it's people like John DeLynn and others who get really upset when their activist friends who agree with their social views are no longer able to be, subverting the doctrines of the church. But boy, would they be really happy that the church got rid of that guy teaching that, black people are less valiant in the pre-existence.
So I guess for me, it's like, again, it's the speculative nature of theology and stuff like that. So to say, like, for instance, Bishop Shelby Spong implied that the Apostle Paul might have been gay. Now, the question I have for you is this idea that maybe some people who wrote the Bible might have been gay to not even be able to speculate or even like just make that statement that I mean,
No, I don't. In a certain context, I can understand people saying that. I mean, I even like wonder like I've heard the idea that Paul might have experienced same sex attraction. Like, fine, maybe that was the case. And in fact, I would almost find Paul's story to be even more heroic if that were the case to a certain extent. That he remained faithful within that context. Um, but I don't think that is, again, everything's about context. In our current context, like, why do you think the professor is talking about that? Like, that would be my question. It's like, what are you getting at? Why are you implying that Jesus was gay? Why are you implying that Joseph of Egypt was gay? If it's to make the point that, like, hey, everyone who experiences same-sex attraction, you have something in common with the Savior or something, and you can be faithful too, like, okay, that's a message maybe I can get behind. But if your message in this context is more like, well, we really need to open our minds about, uh, what righteousness looks like. Because, the Savior, he was righteous and he was, he might have been gay. It's like, this is one is to affirm the doctrines of the church and to encourage faithfulness to Christ. And the other is to try and say, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe the brethren got it wrong and there are matters that I think you can say that about when there's a legitimate case, but there are other issues that are core to the church, like the doctrines around family, marriage, and gender, that I don't care what you say, you are undermining them because you don't believe in them. And let's just be honest. This is the thing that bugs me. Let's just be honest, guys. The issue is you guys don't agree with the church's doctrines in these matters. You don't believe that gender is determined by biological sex or is correlated directly with biological sex at birth, right? You don't believe that that marriage is defined by God as the union of a man and a woman. You don't believe that. And it bothers you. And so you'll go and find any way you can to try and make the case as to why the church is wrong about those things. And that's the problem. You can't do that.
So the question is that, right in the decades preceding the lifting of the black priesthood ban, the church really doubled down on the idea that basically blacks shouldn't have the priesthood, and that your skin could turn lighter as you converted. You had that with the Indian placement program. You had the idea, prophets saying, like, we see the skins of these Native Americans getting lighter. I remember seeing books edited by Thomas Monson in the 1950s, showing white Aboriginal children, showing that they become white when they become righteous. So the point is that these were doctrines that were taught by the church, and they were taught at BYU. And there were people that spoke against these things who or did ordain blacks to the priesthood who were excommunicated from the church. So the question is a lot of people are wondering, is the church doubling down on this very similar to what the church was doubling down on and then until they lifted the ban?
You're exactly right. That is absolutely the way these people view themselves. In other words, they're activists. They say, look, they were activists in the past and they got the church to change its doctrine on these matters. We're just like them. I'm going to be like the great heroes of the civil rights movement and the members of the church who are against this, and we're going to change this thing. That's exactly my point. And this is the thing, though.
But isn't the argument that the
But
church
the thing
can
is that
change?
it isn't going to change.
But you're
And the
saying it
brethren, and it's not, and they are wrong. And so the difference is those people in the past, when it came to blacks and the thing is, they make this conflation. I have an entire video about it.
uh
The conflation of the idea of blacks in the priesthood and the notion of gay marriage and trans ideology. And they conflate them all and they say, this thing is just like that. And so if we could change this, then we can change that. That's what they're doing.
So let me ask you, do you have a problem with the people that were trying to bring about these changes in the
No,
50s?
because I agree with the change. I agree that I agree with them that there was no basis for the priesthood ban. There was no legitimate basis. I agree with the church now that they disavow those doctrines. And the reason why is because there was no reason for them in the first place. When you actually study out the history, there is nothing in scripture that teaches that sub-Saharan Africans should not have the priesthood. And they tried to do so, and those scriptures were shown to be totally bunk.
So the
Okay.
book of Abraham with Egyptus and all that kind of stuff.
Egyptus,
Yeah.
Egyptus are Egyptian sub-Saharan Africans?
Oh, so you're saying that's okay. So it's not
Yeah, there are no sub-Saharan Africans in the scriptures at all, except for the Ethiopians. And what's funny is the Ethiopians get baptized. And not only that, Moses married a
okay.
Cushite, and a
Mhm.
Cushite is an Ethiopian. So literally the only times you have actual sub-Saharan Africans showing up in scripture, one of them gets married to Moses and the other one gets baptized. So to make any, and we didn't ban the priesthood from the descendants of the Canaanites. Those are Near Eastern people. The curse of Cain and the Canaanite people, and Egyptus. These are all Semitic peoples.
Right, but in the 19th century context, though, it was the Canaanites were viewed as being the black.
The descendants of Ham and the
Yes,
Hamitic hypothesis, which was a Protestant hypothesis that
right.
existed at the time. You can
Yep.
track exactly where these ideas come from. They're not
Mhm.
connected to any revelation, and so I agree with the activists. Now let's flip this around, do the same thing with gay marriage. Is there any scriptural precedent for gender? Like, when God created them male and female, and Jesus literally says that the reason God, for this reason, God created them male and female, that they would be joined together. In other words, why does gender exist at all? Gender exists for the purpose of a male-female union. The doctrine of marriage is so deeply rooted and established. There's a reason it's a core notion within the restored gospel. It is like, what did Joseph Smith restore? What was his pinnacle doctrine? It was the sealing doctrines. The exalting doctrines of the restoration are that you are exalted as a man and a woman, Doctrine and Covenants 131, and that you can only attain your highest potential within a male-female union. We're like a yin and a yang. As Paul said, neither is the man without the woman, neither is the woman without the man in the Lord. And so this is, and regardless of what people think about it, that is the Latter-day Saint doctrine from the beginning. And it's the pinnacle restoration doctrine of Joseph Smith. If you get rid of that, like, there's a reason the brethren say this isn't going to change. This isn't like blacks in the priesthood. It's a totally different subject. So to conflate them, as these activists do, because it's really popular amongst their friend group to be this way, and to be fair, it's an extremely difficult challenge for families when you're dealing with someone. I know you experience same-sex attraction. I have gay relatives of various stripes. Like, there's a real question. Well, what do they do? Like, are they supposed to marry a woman? These are very tough
Yeah,
questions.
they're very tough. Yeah.
Oh, really tough. It's see, and I always say this isn't, what's really funny is this is a manifestation of the problem of evil, in the sense of it's unfair. It's so unfair. Why did my brother and why did other relatives of mine and why do other people, why do they have these attractions at all? Well, now you're asking the fundamental question. Why would God allow X thing in the world that's really difficult? Okay. Okay. And so it goes into that entire conversation about the problem of suffering in the world and how you reconcile that with a good God. Okay. And so, and for those, I know there's going to be people listening that's just screaming like, it's only a problem because you make it a problem. And I say no, because here's the difference. Okay. No matter what happens, me and my wife are able to actually have children together. We are able to create between the two of us new life, little people that are a mixture of my wife and myself. Okay. Those who, without a male-female union, that cannot happen. When my wife and I, for a while, we thought we were going to be infertile. There were some issues, and actually, I, to a certain extent, almost believe miraculously that things changed. And it was a real hard thing. And for anyone who experiences same-sex attraction, they have to confront that if they follow the path of those attractions, that they can't have that. And that's I don't care who you are, that's a tough thing. Now there's adoption, and I actually by the way, I actually feel that I believe that if a child's going to end up in a foster system or something like that, I'd much rather have them have, two dads or whatever than to end up in that situation. And I love when infertile couples adopt. Like, I think that is a high and holy thing that can be done. But I have to recognize that this is not, I'm sorry, I've gone on a bit of a tangent here, but I have to recognize this is not the same sort of thing as a unscriptural, non-revelatory set of traditions that emerged amongst church leaders in relation to priesthood ordinations, which have a precedence even in scripture for for being restricted to certain groups of people, right? So it's just apples and oranges. And so when I see the professors at BYU that are advocating against such a core doctrine as the doctrine of marriage and sealings, it's not surprising at all that the officials of the church will say, we need to nip this in the bud because it's going to create confusion in the church.
So I guess for me, for a lot of people, they look at it and they just see that there are parallels. I get where you're coming with the scripture part. I see your point. But what happens if 10, 20 years down the road, the church were to allow for gay marriage? What is that
I would, I'd
what
become an activist against the church.
so so
And
okay,
I would seek to get the church back on track to its and I would and I'm a very open and honest person, transparent. I'd start opposing.
okay.
I'd oppose I'd oppose the leaders of the church. In fact, today, if my stake president were to like come out and be like gay marriage, I would oppose.
Okay, now
I'd say you should not be our stake president.
would you be okay with you being excommunicated if
Yeah,
you did that?
yeah, they
Okay.
have every right to excommunicate me. It's their church. They have that authority. But I would say I'll if I can be excommunicated for Christ, like I follow Christ. And the moment that I think that you guys have genuinely deviated from the truth, you've strayed into apostasy, and I you can't reconcile some of those things. But I would probably work within the church to try my best to change it and to encourage others to oppose leaders and things like that. And and I likely would be excommunicated. I don't know if they would tolerate it. But it's funny because the very people that are like, why would we ever excommunicate people? Like they'd be fine excommunicating me. See, it's just a power game for them. Like I'm trying to remain faithful to the restored gospel of Jesus Christ. And you can't make the case that the restored gospel of Jesus Christ is anything but affirming of gender and marriage as traditionally conceived of in the Christian tradition generally and in the Bible.
So I typically don't when it comes to those issues, because I am a gay man. I don't typically go there because I feel like I don't want to make it personal. You know what I'm saying? But I
Yeah, and I just want to let you know, Steve, like I I even as I was giving that conversation, you're kind of on that little rant a minute ago, like I know that you experience these things, and I am a deep admirer of you for your faith and for all that you do. And I don't ever want you to think that I think anything less of you. In fact, I think more of you and of members of the church who seek with all their hearts to be faithful to Jesus Christ within that sort of a context. Because I know that that is and honestly, they're like some of my greatest heroes are people who do that. So I just want to hat
okay.
off to you, and I don't hold that against you.
Can I just maybe ask you to maybe consider your verbiage when you say experience same-sex attraction? It'd be like me saying Jacob Hansen experiencing heterosexuality. It seems awkward to say that.
That's fine. I'll do that. I'll do that for you in this context, and I'm happy to do that as a courtesy. Sure.
Okay, all right, that's cool because I sometimes people say that I'm like, no, it's like, there wasn't a day that you decided you were straight. It's like it's part of my sexuality is as much a part of my identity as it is yours. However, I'm not one of those people who makes it all the center of their life either. It's just
Yeah.
it's part of me and stuff. So, well, I have to say that there are some areas where I do agree with you on. I do think, first of all, I'm a firm believer in the First Amendment. I'm a firm believer in the idea that religious institutions should be able to believe and teach what they want. And that there shouldn't be government interference, and that nor should activists use the government as a tool to try to tell religious institutions what they can or can't do, because I think that's a violation of the First Amendment. I also agree that, look, when you've decided you're going to go with a religious institution and you've made that decision to do that, then you need to be respectful of those doctrines and beliefs of those schools, of those churches. I can see how, many, almost all the Ivy League schools were originally religious institutions, and they kind of slipped into became secular universities. And I think that's the fear that a lot of people have, is that if these religious institutions become too open, too secular, that essentially the religious foundations of these institutions will be forgotten, and the whole purpose of those institutions, the founding principles of institutions have been largely ignored and forgotten. So I get that too. Maybe speak to
Yeah.
that.
And I would say that, and maybe this is a good kind of reconciliatory sort of note here on this, is that with what's going on at BYU, you do bring up a good point. There's always a tension. There's always a push in both directions for more academic freedom, for order and chaos, right? We want to avoid order that becomes oppressive, and we want to avoid chaos to where there's no order to, there's nothing unique about BYU in the sense that it doesn't have any sort of a unique order to it, right? Now, I would say, and most people, that the pressure has been in one direction for a long time. It's No one would say that BYU has just been getting more and more like orthodox and conservative. Everyone should be able to agree that it's been moving that direction. And I think rightfully so. And in fact, most of us would say too late. The church has begun to say, we need to start to push back that other direction because we're losing our identity as a church school by allowing so much academic freedom that there's a freedom to be activists and to be those very people who, as we pointed out, that see themselves as we're the people who, are like the pre-1978 people that were against the priesthood ban. And so there is a tension there, and there is a danger in going too far in the other direction. Okay. I agree with that. I don't want us to have radical sort of orthodoxy tests to where it's like, if you don't think that the world was created 6,000 years ago, which by the way isn't an official position of the church, but you can see where certain positions could stifle the ability to have anyone, because basically nobody agrees with the church on every possible little minute detail, right? So can you go too far the other direction? Sure. And I think we do need to be aware of that. So that's why in my video, I genuinely pray for Brother Gilbert, or for Elder Gilbert, that he will use his judgment to help restore the right level of order within BYU so that it can maximize that. But obviously, I agree that in our current context, that a push back in the direction of the order of BYU and keeping it aligned with the brethren, I think is a good move.
Well, Jacob, I just want to thank you so much for giving your perspective today, and would have loved to have had Greg here, but I actually enjoyed our conversation one-on-one today. I hope that I hope you don't feel like I pushed back on you too hard, but I really felt like
No,
important.
Steve, you're the best.
I think it was important to have this conversation, and again, I'm friends with many of these people, and I have to tell you, Jacob, these are people that are good, wonderful people who have contributed mightily to the institution, and I just want to speak on their behalf that, I I feel bad that they're in the position that they're in. They're seeking employment elsewhere, and I do feel that for a lot of these people to leave, it's not a good thing for the institution. The institution will be a lesser institution as a result. And again, these are not activists. These are just academics who feel like this is not a safe space for them
And
anymore.
to those people, here's what I would say. I would say, look, I hope that you can have the courage to be honest with administrators in the church, and that you can hopefully, I hope you're not leaving out of a fear that is not like that you don't need to have, like, that's over exaggerated fear. If you are not, I think my personal belief is that if you can trust that the church will allow you to retain your job, and I think you should trust that the church will do this, that BYU will allow you to keep your job so long as you don't publicly do things that insinuate that subvert the doctrines of the church, then you should be fine. And I think that if the institution is unwilling to allow you to do that, that even to privately hold views contrary to the church is enough to fire you, I would be disappointed in the institution for that. But I think that if you, as a professor, this is my prediction, and maybe I'm wrong, that if you as a professor never publicly subvert the doctrines of the church around marriage and gender, that you will be fine and you'll be able to continue. And God bless you for your expertise and your courage in being someone who's willing to do that. So that would be my message to them. And I don't wish anyone, the worst, but at the end of the day, I do think if that isn't something you can do or agree to in good conscience, then I do have to say that I just don't think BYU is the school for someone like that.
Okay, well, thank you for giving your perspective. I do want to let people know that of course, I'm going to have other voices included in this conversation. For those of you who would like to maybe make a response to Jacob, feel free to reach out to me. I'd like to be able to get some different perspectives on this. Again, I am friends with a lot of people who are very concerned about their livelihood, and I don't want I want to let you know that, I do care about you, and also think it's important that we get those voices heard here at MBR as well. Jacob, thanks for joining the show today.
Thank you.
And for those of you who'd like to financially support the channel, we will have links in the description. Also, I will put a link in the description to Jacob's video that he posted the other day regarding his views on this whole thing. And just want to remind you, the most important thing is this: all the voices of the restoration will be heard here on Mormon Book Reviews.